There is a particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather. It settles into your bones when the world looks straight through you like you're made of glass. 16-year-old Amara knew that cold better than she knew her own name most days. She had learned to disappear in plain sight, walking past crowded sidewalks without a single person turning their head, without one pair of eyes stopping long enough to ask if she was okay. Her home, if you could call it that, was a narrow gap behind a shuttered laundromat on the edge of downtown. The machines inside had gone silent years ago, but the wall still held a little warmth from the old dryer vents, just enough to keep her from freezing on the worst nights. She had a flattened cardboard box, a threadbare blanket someone had thrown away, and a backpack with everything she owned zipped inside it. That was her whole world. Every morning started the same way. She would wake before the sun, before the street cleaners came through, before anyone could see her folding up her cardboard bed and tucking it out of sight. She'd walk 3 blocks to the gas station on 5th, the one with a bathroom door that never quite locked. And she'd wash her face with cold water and paper towels, staring at herself in a cracked mirror, wondering some mornings if the girl looking back was even still in there. People passed her by the way you'd pass a lamppost. She had gotten used to the particular sting of being unseen. Grown men in suits stepping around her without breaking stride. Mothers pulling their children a little closer, a little faster. Nobody cruel, most of them just numb to her, the way people get numb to anything they see too often and don't know how to fix. But there were nights, quiet ones, when a memory would surface without permission. A woman's voice, warm and low, humming something Amara could never quite place. The smell of something sweet baking. The feeling of being lifted up onto someone's hip, safe, certain, loved, then smoke. Screaming, hands pulling her one way while she reached out for another set of hands that never came. She was 7 years old the night the fire took her house, and, as far as she knew, took her mother too. What came after was worse in its own quiet way. Foster homes that never stayed homes for long. Paperwork that got lost. Caseworkers who changed every few months, each one starting over like she was a fresh case, instead of a girl who had already lost everything once. By 14, she had stopped waiting for someone to come looking for her. And she had walked out of the last house she was placed in without looking back. 2 years on the street will teach a person how to survive on almost nothing. Amara knew which restaurants tossed out untouched food right at closing. She knew which shelters had beds left by 9, and which didn't. She knew how to make a single granola bar last a whole day when it had to. Hunger wasn't an occasional visitor anymore. It was a permanent resident, living somewhere behind her ribs, never fully quiet. That particular evening, the hunger was louder than usual. She hadn't eaten since the morning before, and the cold had a sharper edge to it than most nights. She was cutting through the block near the financial district, a part of the city that never felt like it belonged to people like her, when she saw the line of black cars pulled up outside a restaurant with a doorman and a menu she couldn't have afforded to look at, let alone order from. A woman was stepping toward one of the cars, sharp suit, composed face, the kind of presence that made people straighten up without knowing why. Amara didn't know who she was. She didn't know about the company, the headlines, the empire this woman had built with her bare hands. All Amara knew was that there was a Togo box in that woman's grip, and her stomach had made the decision before her pride had a chance to argue. She crossed the street on legs that felt heavier than they should have, walked up to the car window, and asked the only question hunger had left her with. Could she have the leftovers? The words left Amara's mouth before she could second-guess them. Could she have the leftovers? 4 small words, but they cost her something to say. Pride doesn't disappear just because you're hungry. It just learns to step aside for a moment and let survival go first. The woman in the car went still, not the kind of still that comes from being startled, but the kind that comes from being caught off guard by something you didn't expect to feel anything about. For a second, neither of them said a word. The city kept moving around them, horns and footsteps and the hum of a restaurant full of people who would never have to ask anyone for their scraps, but right there at that car window, everything had gone quiet. Then the bodyguards moved. 2 of them, broad-shouldered, already stepping between the girl and the car like she was a threat, instead of a 16-year-old with nothing in her stomach since the morning before. One of them put a hand up, not touching her, but close enough to make his point. "Move along," he said, not unkindly, just the way people say things when they've said them 100 times before, and stopped noticing the person on the other end of it. Amara had heard that phrase more times than she could count. Move along. Like she was smoke, like she was something to be cleared out of a doorway. She had already started to step back, already bracing for the familiar sting of being brushed off, when the woman's voice cut through, sharp and sure. Wait. Just that one word, but it carried enough weight to stop both bodyguards cold. The woman was looking at Amara now, really looking, the way almost no one looked at her anymore. Her eyes moved over Amara's face slowly, like she was searching for something she couldn't name. Something that didn't make sense to be searching for in a stranger on a sidewalk. Amara shifted under the weight of that stare, unsure if she'd done something wrong. "It's fine," the woman said to her security, waving them back with a small motion of her hand. "Give us a minute." The bodyguards exchanged a glance but obeyed, stepping back to a respectful distance, though their eyes never fully left the girl. Amara stood there, awkward, unsure whether to stay or run, her arms wrapped around herself more from nerves now than cold. That's when it happened. Without even realizing she was doing it, Amara had started humming. It was a small, quiet thing, barely audible, a melody with no name attached to it in her memory. Just something that lived in the back of her mind and came out whenever she was anxious or overwhelmed. She'd hummed it her whole life without knowing where it came from. A tune with no lyrics, no explanation, just a feeling stitched into sound. The woman's face changed the moment she heard it. Something crossed her expression that Amara couldn't read. A flicker of shock, maybe even something close to pain, gone as quickly as it appeared, but not quite fast enough to hide completely. Her hand, which had been resting on the car door, tightened just slightly. She opened her mouth like she wanted to ask something, then closed it again, like she wasn't sure the question would even make sense out loud. "Where did you learn that?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now, stripped of the sharpness it had carried a moment ago. Amara blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've just always known it. Since I was a kid, I guess." The woman studied her for a long moment, long enough that it started to feel like more than curiosity. There was something underneath it, something searching, something that looked almost like hope trying very hard not to show itself in case it got proven wrong again. "Sit with me," she said suddenly, gesturing toward the open door of the restaurant behind her. "Just for a few minutes. You look like you could use a warm meal, and I could use the company." It wasn't charity in her voice. Amara could tell the difference. She'd heard pity before, the kind that hands you a few dollars just to feel better about walking away. This was something else entirely, something the woman herself didn't seem to fully understand. It was instinct, plain and unexplainable, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it acts. Amara hesitated only a second before nodding, following the woman through the restaurant doors, unaware that the small, unremarkable tune she'd been humming her whole life without knowing why was about to change everything. Inside the restaurant, away from the cold and the noise of the street, the woman introduced herself as Adeze. She said the name plainly, like it was just a name, though Amara would later learn it was one that appeared on business magazine covers and building plaques across the city. Right then, sitting across a table with warm food in front of her for the first time in longer than she could remember, Amara only knew her as a woman with tired eyes and a voice that kept catching on things it didn't finish saying. Adeze watched her eat for a while before she spoke again. "You don't have to tell me your story," she said carefully, "but I'd like to tell you a piece of mine. If you'll let me." Amara nodded, unsure why a stranger with this much power would want to share anything with a girl like her. But something about the offer felt important, so she stayed quiet and listened. Adeze hadn't always had money, she explained. She'd grown up in a neighborhood the city liked to forget existed unless there was an election coming. The kind of place where the streetlights stayed broken for months and nobody came to fix them. Where the fire department's response times were double what they were on the other side of town, where banks smiled politely and still found a reason to say no. She built her first business from a folding table and a borrowed sewing machine, and when it started to succeed, a man she'd trusted took the idea, tweaked the name, and filed the paperwork under his own. She had no lawyer, no money for one, and no one who believed a young black woman's word over his. She kept going anyway. Rebuilt from nothing a second time, then a third. Every step forward came with someone trying to push her 2 steps back, a loan denied for reasons that never quite added up. A contract that mysteriously fell through the moment they learned who she was. But she was stubborn in the way that people become when giving up simply isn't an option anymore, and slowly, business by business, she built something that couldn't be taken from her as easily. Then came the part of the story her voice grew unsteady over. She had a daughter, she said. A little girl with a hum she used to sing her to sleep. An old tune with no real name, just something a Daisy's own mother had passed down to her. One night, when her daughter was 7, an electrical fire tore through their apartment building. The wiring had been reported faulty months earlier, complaints filed and ignored. The kind of maintenance requests that always seem to move slower in buildings like theirs. By the time the fire department arrived, the building was already half gone. Daisy had gotten separated from her daughter in the smoke and chaos, pulled out by a stranger while reaching back for a hand she couldn't find. She spent that entire night believing her daughter hadn't made it out. The official report, when it finally came, listed the child among those who didn't survive. But something about that report never sat right with her. There was no body ever recovered that matched. No dental records, no proper investigation, just a box checked and a case closed faster than it should have been. She spent years afterward pouring money into private investigators, into reopening records that kept coming back sealed or missing, into a system that had every incentive to leave a poor black family's tragedy buried rather than admit a mistake. Or worse, a cover-up. What she eventually uncovered broke something in her all over again. A caseworker at the time had falsified paperwork on more than one child pulled from that fire, marking some as deceased when they had, in fact, been placed into the foster system under new records, whether from negligence, corruption, or a bribe paid to make a messy situation disappear quietly. Nobody had ever been held accountable. The trail went cold, buried under years of bureaucracy and indifference, in a case nobody with power had ever cared enough to follow all the way through. Daisy had spent 9 years since that night never remarrying, never fully letting herself rest, always half-searching, even when she told herself she'd made peace with the loss. She built her foundation, quietly funded shelters and legal aid for families going through what she'd gone through, always looking for something she couldn't quite name in every face she passed. Amara sat frozen through the entire story, her fork forgotten on the plate in front of her, her chest tight in a way she didn't fully understand yet. Something about the fire. Something about the hum. Something about the number 9 sitting heavy in the air between them. "I'm sorry," Amara finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. That's a horrible thing to go through." Daisy reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted it, her eyes never quite leaving the girl sitting across from her. "It is," she said quietly, "but I've learned that the worst systems in this world don't survive on cruelty alone. They survive on people staying quiet, on records nobody double-checks, on grief nobody follows up on. I promised myself a long time ago that if the truth was still out there somewhere, I wouldn't stop until I found it." She paused, studying Amara's face in the dim restaurant light, something building behind her eyes that she still wasn't ready to say out loud. "Tell me something," she said carefully. "Do you know where you were before you ended up on the street? Do you remember anything from before?" Amara's hands had started to shake slightly around her fork. Pieces were moving into place in her mind faster than she could organize them, memories she'd buried so deep she'd stopped trusting they were real. A fire. A woman's hands slipping from hers in the smoke. A hum with no name. "I don't remember much," Amara said slowly. "Just a fire. I was 7, and I've been humming that same song my whole life, and I never knew why." The restaurant seemed to fall away around them. The clinking of silverware, the low murmur of other conversations, the soft music playing somewhere in the background, all of it faded into something distant and unimportant. Adese's hands had gone still on the table, her eyes locked onto Amara's face like she was trying to memorize something she'd already lost once and couldn't bear to lose again by looking away. "Say that again," Adese whispered. "The song. You said you've hummed it your whole life." Amara nodded slowly, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't fully explain yet. "Since before I can remember. I don't know where it came from. It's always been there. Like it's a part of me." Adese's breath caught. Her mother used to hum it to her, she said, voice trembling now, unpolished in a way it hadn't been the entire conversation. "And I used to hum it to my daughter. Every single night. It doesn't have a name. It's not a real song. It's ours. It was ours." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile at the same time. Amara's hands had started shaking again, and this time she couldn't blame the cold. Something in her chest had cracked open, something she'd kept locked away for 9 years because it hurt too much to hope. She reached up, almost without meaning to, and touched the small faded mark just behind her left ear. A birthmark shaped like a small crescent, one she'd had for as long as she could remember and never thought twice about. "I have this mark," Amara said quietly, turning her head slightly, pulling her hair back so it was visible. "Right here. I don't know if that means anything." Adese stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled behind her. She crossed around the table in 3 steps, kneeling slightly beside Amara's chair, her hands trembling as she gently brushed the hair back herself, staring at the small crescent-shaped mark like it was the only thing in the entire world that mattered anymore. "That's her," Adese breathed, barely audible. That's exactly where it was. I used to trace that mark every night before she fell asleep. I used to tell her it meant she was marked for something extraordinary." Amara's eyes had filled with tears she didn't know how to stop. Her hands moved instinctively to the collar of her worn shirt, fingers finding the small chain she always kept tucked out of sight. The one piece of jewelry she'd had since before she could remember and had never once taken off, even through every foster home, every shelter, every cold night on the street. She pulled it free, revealing a small tarnished locket, its surface scratched and faded from years of wear. "I've had this since I was little," Amara said, her voice cracking. "I don't even know why I kept it. I never could bring myself to sell it or lose it, even when I had nothing." Adese's whole body went rigid. "Open it," she whispered. Amara's fingers fumbled with the tiny clasp, hands shaking too hard to manage it easily, until finally the locket sprang open, revealing a small faded photograph inside, worn nearly smooth from years of handling. A photograph of a younger Adese, laughing, holding a small girl on her hip. Both of them caught mid-laugh in a moment, neither of them remembered being photographed. The sound that left Adese was not quite a sob, and not quite a laugh. Something raw and disbelieving that came from somewhere far deeper than either. She pressed both hands over her mouth, staring at the photograph. Staring at Amara's face like she was seeing it clearly for the first time, like 9 years of grief had suddenly been given somewhere to go. "It's you," Adese said, the words breaking apart as they left her. "It's really you. I looked for you everywhere. I never stopped looking. I hired investigators every single year. I reopened the case 3 times. I never remarried. I never let myself really live, because some part of me refused to believe you were gone. And here you are. Here you are." Amara couldn't speak. She simply reached out, and Adeze pulled her into her arms without hesitation, both of them holding on like letting go might undo whatever impossible thing had just happened. Amara felt herself shaking, felt the tears she'd held back for 9 years finally breaking loose, felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight since she was 7 years old finally begin to loosen. Around them, the restaurant had gone quiet. Other guests turning to watch the scene unfold without fully understanding what they were witnessing. But neither Adeze nor Amara noticed or cared. For the first time in 9 years, neither of them was alone in the world anymore. For the first time in 9 years, the space where a mother and daughter should have been standing together was no longer empty. "I'm not letting you go again," Adeze whispered into her daughter's hair, her voice fierce and certain in a way it hadn't been the entire conversation. Not ever again. And for the first time since the night of the fire, Amara let herself believe her. The weeks that followed moved faster than Amara ever thought her life could move again. There were tests to confirm what both of them already knew in their hearts, lawyers to untangle 9 years of falsified paperwork, and a mountain of records that had conveniently gone missing the moment anyone with real power started asking questions about them. But Adeze was not the kind of woman who backed down once she'd found something worth fighting for, and this time she had every resource in the world behind her. She started with the foster care worker who had handled Amara's case all those years ago, the same one who had marked children as deceased instead of properly processing their placements. It didn't take long for investigators to trace a pattern of quiet payments, small sums moved just carefully enough to avoid easy detection, made in exchange for looking the other way when paperwork should have been corrected, and never was. Families broken apart, not by accident, but by a system that found it easier and cheaper to lose a file than to do the harder work of reuniting a mother with her child. Adeze didn't stop there. She turned her attention to the fire department records from that night, the ones that had labeled her daughter among the lost without a single piece of physical evidence to support it. What she found confirmed what she'd suspected for years, a department that had been chronically underfunded and understaffed in that part of the city. Response times that were double what they were in wealthier neighborhoods, safety complaints filed and ignored for months before the fire ever broke out. The night everything burned wasn't just bad luck. It was the direct result of a system that had decided, long before that fire started, that some neighborhoods and some families simply mattered less. She didn't seek revenge. She sought accountability, and there is a difference. She used her platform, her legal team, and every ounce of public trust she'd built over the years to bring the truth into the light where it could no longer be buried. The caseworker lost her position and faced formal charges. The fire department was forced into a public reckoning, its funding and safety practices placed under scrutiny they could no longer avoid. It didn't undo 9 years of separation. Nothing could do that. But it meant the next family in that same situation might not fall through the same cracks. For Amara, healing came slower than justice did, the way it usually does. There were nights in her new home when she still woke expecting cardboard beneath her instead of a mattress, still flinched at kindness before she remembered she was allowed to trust it now. Adeze never rushed her. She simply stayed, patient in a way that felt like its own kind of love, letting Amara set the pace for a relationship neither of them had ever stopped wanting. Amara didn't want to just be given a life. She wanted to build one, the same way her mother had, brick by brick, out of something that had once felt like nothing. She started spending time at her mother's foundation, the one Adeze had quietly built over the years to support shelters and legal aid for families who couldn't afford to fight the system alone. What began as simple curiosity turned into purpose. Amara understood the people who walked through those doors in a way no one else on staff could. Because she had once been one of them. She knew what it felt like to be looked past on a sidewalk. She knew what it cost a person to ask a stranger for their leftovers. Within a few years, she was running an entire division of the foundation herself, one focused specifically on housing equity in underserved Black communities, the same kind of neighborhood where her mother had grown up and where their family had nearly been erased for good. She pushed for faster emergency response times in overlooked districts. She fought for tighter oversight in the foster care system, for accountability measures that made it harder for another child's file to simply vanish. Every policy she championed carried a piece of her own story inside it, and every family they helped felt a little like closing a door that had once been left open on her own life. There's a lesson in all of it, if you're willing to sit with it a while. Prejudice and neglect can bury the truth for years, but they rarely bury it forever. Somewhere a record still exists. Somewhere a person still remembers. And sometimes all it takes for the truth to surface is one small, unexplainable moment of humanity. A woman stopping her bodyguards instead of waving a hungry girl away. A hum neither of them could explain. A locket that never got sold no matter how desperate things became. Dignity is a quiet thing. It doesn't always announce itself, and it doesn't always get rewarded right away. But it has a way of outlasting the systems built to crush it. Amara spent years being told, in 1,000 small ways, that she didn't matter, that she was invisible, that she was someone to be moved along and forgotten. She never believed it, not all the way down, and in the end, that refusal to disappear was exactly what led her back home. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth has a way of finding its way back no matter how long it takes, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the hum she couldn't explain, or the locket she never let go of? My name is Simmons, and this has been another story from Chronicles of Black History. If you're new here, welcome, and thank you for sitting with this story until the very end. If these kinds of stories matter to you, stories of resilience, injustice, and the truth finding its way home, consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. Until next time, take care of each other.